I had always believed that life's most meaningful changes announce themselves loudly, with some unmistakable sign, but I was wrong. The moment that altered something deep within me arrived quietly, wrapped in something as ordinary as a broken television. On an afternoon washed in that pale, fading gold light that November seems to carry like a memory it refuses to let go of. I remember standing in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile steeping longer than it should have, the faint floral scent drifting upward. While the house hummed its familiar, tired rhythm around me, the refrigerator murmuring against the wall, the clock ticking with patience, as if time itself knew I had nowhere else to be, nowhere else to go. I had been alone in that house for 11 years, since my husband Samuel passed quietly in his sleep one winter morning, leaving behind a silence that settled into the walls. And the furniture and even into my bones, a silence I had learned not to fight but to live inside, shaping my days into a careful, unbroken routine that began at dawn and ended without surprise, as though predictability itself could protect me from feeling the full weight of absence. Every morning I would wake at the same hour, feed the stray cat that had adopted my porch without permission, prepare my tea in the same chipped mug, and sit in the same chair facing the television, letting whatever program happened to be playing fill the space with voices. Voices that required nothing from me, voices that did not notice my quiet or question my stillness. And when that television went dark one afternoon, cutting off mid-sentence as if someone had gently placed a hand over its mouth, I found myself sitting there longer than I should have, staring at my own faint reflection in the blank screen, realizing with a small, unexpected jolt that I did not know how to fix it, nor did I know who to call. Because for years I had let that part of living slip away from me, the part that involved solving, repairing, reaching out. It felt almost embarrassing to admit, even to myself, that I had allowed grief to narrow my world so completely. And so I sat there until my tea turned cold, until the light shifted and the room grew dimmer. Finally I stood, moving slowly as though breaking some unspoken rule, and found a number scribbled on an old receipt. Pinned near the fuse box, a handyman service I must have saved without ever thinking I would need it. And dialing that number felt strangely significant, my fingers hesitating for just a second before pressing each digit, as though I were crossing some invisible boundary. When the man answered, his voice steady and calm. I almost forgot what I was calling about, but I managed to explain, and he said he could come the next day in the afternoon. When I agreed, I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, aware that something had already shifted. Something small but undeniable, like the first crack in ice at the end of winter. The next day arrived with a soft, persistent rain. That blurred the edges of everything outside my windows, and when the knock came at exactly 2, it startled me more than it should have. I opened the door to find a man who looked as though he had spent a lifetime carrying things both heavy and delicate. His shoulders broad, but his posture careful, his hair threaded with gray that caught the light in a way that made it seem almost deliberate. And there was a quietness about him, not the emptiness I had grown used to, but something steadier, something grounded. When he greeted me, his voice had a warmth that made the small space between us feel less confined. I stepped aside to let him in, suddenly aware of my home in a way I had not been in years, the worn edges of the furniture. The photographs that had not moved since they were first placed, the faint scent of lavender polish that lingered in the air. He did not look around with curiosity or judgment, but with a kind of respect, as though he understood that a home is more than its objects, that it holds the weight of every moment lived within it. He set his tools down near the television and began his work. With a focus that was almost meditative, his hands moving with a quiet confidence that made the task seem less like a repair, and more like a conversation between him and the machine. I found myself lingering nearby, unsure whether to stay or retreat. But he did not ask me to leave, and so I remained standing just at the edge of the room, watching the careful precision of his movements. The way he handled each piece as though it mattered, and there was something unexpectedly comforting in that. Something that reminded me of how Samuel used to fix things around the house, not with haste but with patience, as though taking the time to understand was part of the act itself. And I realized then how long it had been since I had witnessed that kind of quiet attention. That kind of presence, and it stirred something faint but persistent inside me, something I had not named in years. I moved to the kitchen under the pretense of making tea, though I had already had more than enough. And I busied myself with small, unnecessary tasks, rinsing a cup that was already clean, straightening items that did not need arranging, simply to steady the unfamiliar feeling that had begun to take root. When I returned, he had removed the back panel of the television, exposing its inner workings, and the soft sounds of metal and plastic being adjusted filled the room in a rhythm that felt oddly reassuring. We remained in silence for some time, but it was not the kind of silence I had grown accustomed to, not empty or heavy, but shared, as though it belonged to both of us equally. When he finally spoke, it was not about the television, but about the neighborhood. A simple observation that opened the door to something more, and I found myself responding without hesitation, telling him how long I had lived there, how the street had changed and yet somehow remained the same. And he listened in a way that made me feel heard, not just acknowledged, but truly understood. In return, he shared pieces of his own life, not all at once, but gradually, like someone placing stones carefully across a stream. I learned that he too had known loss, that he too had built a life around the quiet spaces left behind by someone who was no longer there. And there was a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when the distance between us seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared recognition. That needed no explanation. When the rain outside grew heavier, tapping insistently against the windows, I offered him tea. And he accepted with a small nod, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table that had once held conversations and laughter, and now held something quieter but no less meaningful. And we spoke not to fill the silence but to honor it, sharing small details of our lives that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else but felt important in that moment. When his hand rested lightly over mine, it was not sudden or startling but natural, as though it had always been meant to happen. And I did not pull away because there was no reason to, because the gesture carried no expectation, no demand, only a quiet reassurance that I was not as invisible as I had begun to believe. And when he eventually stood to finish his work, the room felt different. Not transformed, but softened, as though something within it had been gently adjusted, and when the television flickered back to life, filling the space with light and sound once more, it felt almost secondary to what had already taken place. I walked him to the door, aware that this brief encounter had shifted something fundamental within me. Something I could not fully explain but could undeniably feel, and as I watched him leave, the rain easing into a fine mist that blurred his figure as he moved away, I realized that the true repair had not been the television but something far less visible. And far more important, something within me that had quietly, patiently waited for years to be acknowledged. And standing there in the fading light, I understood that even after all this time, even after all the years I had spent believing that certain parts of my life were simply over, it was still possible to be seen, still possible to feel the gentle return of something I had thought was gone forever, and that realization settled into me not with force but with a quiet certainty, like the steady glow of evening light that lingers just a little longer than expected, reminding you that not everything fades as quickly as you once believed.